Okay, I'm going to do a series of videos related to more of the mental or philosophical aspect of studying. And these involve like study habits or study tricks or just basic conceptual outlines of how to study or how to think or motivating factors. One way, one study trick or study habit that you can use or I use is called the invisible child. And in this method, what you're going to do is you're going to pretend you're tutoring a small child, let's say someone who's like 8 or 10 or 12, somewhere around there. And the purpose behind this is, the reason why it's a child, first of all, is because that gives you motivation or incentive to try to explain the concept. Let's say you're doing something related to math or biology or chemistry, English, whatever it may be, in the simplest possible way. If you have a child, you're not going to explain them with very complicated, long-winded explanations that may curtail or go around a very simple explanation for the same thing. So you want to explain whatever topic you're doing in the simplest possible way. And just, this is used if let's say you're in grade 8 or you're in high school, and you're learning some new math subject or new science subject for the first time, and you were to read whatever the concept they're trying to teach you is. First you would read it, then once you feel like you've done enough examples and practice it, then I would usually, or you would usually, employ the invisible child method. And what this does is it constantly gives you repetitive practice to make sure that you understand whatever you're trying to learn in the simplest possible way. Because sometimes when you teach something to someone, okay, let's put it this way, when you're doing a question, you mentally take things for granted. It's not until you actually explain or teach to someone else that you get exposed for the insufficiencies in your own understanding of a subject. That whatever you take for granted, maybe you weren't necessarily very clear on why you're doing what you're doing. This way, it kind of gives you another way to explain, another way to understand, and in that way, it makes your understanding much deeper than it was before. Before, you might have had a very surface level understanding. When you have a very surface level understanding, it doesn't take long before all that information is gone through your head. If you have a very deep and rich understanding of a subject from many different avenues, then it usually sticks with you a lot longer. So let's say you're given some math example, let's say you're learning how to do algebra for the first time. Once you've done enough examples, then maybe you might do the invisible child method. You don't have to do this all the time, but you might just do it once in a while just to verify you understand very well. You can talk to yourself, you could say, okay, so what is the purpose of algebra? Well, we're trying to manipulate things, we're trying to isolate x. And then maybe you might ramble and you're like, oh wait, I don't know how to explain that well. That means you don't understand it. That means you have to stop, you have to take a piece of paper or whatever method works better for you and go over and over until you finally feel like you've said it very simply. So then after you've done this, you might go back to the invisible child method. You might say, okay, so the purpose of algebra is to manipulate equations or expressions in order to get x by itself. And you might do that in the following way. Let's say you're given that, and then you might do examples. So the purpose of the invisible child is you're pretending you're sitting beside someone and you're tutoring that subject to them. And if you do this for the rest of your academic career, you'll understand any subject, any area. It could be math, it could be science, it could be English, it could be whatever. If you employ it, your understanding will just go through the roof. It'll get much deeper because it's one thing to understand it yourself. It's another thing to try to make everyone else understand it in simplest terms. And there are many great scientists and thinkers who've employed this method to some variation. So I would employ this invisible child method.